Now we're turning our attention back to the case of this firearms officer because there are fresh calls to protect police officers from prosecution and be given the benefit of the doubt following the fatal shooting of Chris Kaba.
Now look, we're about to show you the body cam footage of the moments that led up to the fatal shooting during this the dramatic police stop. And obviously we have to tell you that some of you might find it distressing, so just be aware. Sergeant Martin Blake was accused of Kaba's murder, of course, after shooting him straight through the car windscreen. But earlier this week, as we know, a jury found him not guilty of murder.
Does the law adequately protect armed police who are often making split-second decisions in dangerous circumstances? This is Tony Long. He was an armed police officer once and also faced trial for murder. Cleared, just like Martin Blake, says his colleagues are treated like criminals for doing their jobs. Alongside him, a former police officer herself, Chantal Luntz, who says there isn't enough accountability when a gun is fired. And the protection, presumably, Chantal, you would say more protection is not needed for police officers in this situation. Perhaps the protection is necessary in the accountability for those who are shot. I want to ask you first, though, Tony Long, this case was very similar to the case that you faced.
There were similarities, certainly.
Can you talk us through what happened in your case?
In my case, well, I'm going to labour my case because it's about Blake, but very briefly, I was on an intelligence-led operation that took place over 2 days. And on the second day, after a build-up of intelligence that led us to believe that 3 young black men were in a car and they had access to 2 MAC-10 submachine guns, a very dangerous weapon.
You mean with them in the car?
That was the intelligence that we had. And we knew that they were on their way to murder, or rob first, and then murder rival Colombian drug dealers. We were given the order to carry out an intervention, and I was in what we call the side-blocking vehicle. And Azelle Rodney's body language led me to believe that he'd picked up a weapon and was about to fire. I couldn't see his hands because of his positioning in the vehicle. So, you know, I'd been involved in shootings before that were far more clear-cut. This was a big leap of faith that he was indeed armed. I fired him a total of 8 rounds and he died. And subsequently it was discovered there was a gun indeed on the back seat and there were 2 other guns in the back. They weren't the dangerous submachine guns that we were led to believe, but intelligence isn't always totally correct.
Well, they were weapons.
They were weapons, yeah.
So the intelligence that you received was about the individuals in the car?
No, we actually knew almost nothing about the individuals in the car. One of the similarities is that Azelle Rodney was part of an organised crime group, as was Chris Kaba. And we had, on the intelligence briefing, we were given a display of about 8 photographs, and it was like perm any 3 from these. Any of these could be the people that are going to be carrying out the robbery.
And so what was it that alerted you? Was it the car? Was the intelligence?
So a surveillance team were following them. We had intelligence that came from a technical covert source, which isn't admissible in a court of law, and that's why my case took 10 years to come to fruition, because of the legal aspects. But so we were listening to, I'm assuming, listening to conversations through surveillance officers, possibly listening to phones, I don't know. But certainly we had a live surveillance team behind them.
Can I ask you, psychologically, what goes through your mind in that moment before you make, or as you make the decision to pull the trigger? You know that what you're about to do is likely to take another human life, and you fired more than once. I wouldn't say in anger, because it's not in anger, it's with a very calculated intent. What is your state of mind in those seconds leading up to pulling the trigger and in the moments afterwards?
Well, obviously, adrenaline's going through your system, you know, and when adrenaline's released into the body, it has effects. It focuses your attention, you know, specifically on what the threat is, but then you become quite unaware of some of the other things that are happening around you. But in terms of going through your mind, doing the job, training, you know, I've been asked a question, you get people saying, well, you know, what's it like to shoot someone? And my reply might sound a bit glib, but it's training. That's what there comes a moment.
What do you mean by that when you say training?
Well, you spend all day, or, you know, lots of days, you know, per month training, you know, going through scenarios, shooting what we call simunition against each other, against human targets, firing live ammunition at targets in close quarter combat ranges, and you're highly trained.
How many people have you shot?
So I was involved in 3 separate incidents. One was a domestic dispute where a man was stabbing a little girl, and I shot him, and that was in 85. In 87...
He survived?
He survived, although I deliberately shot him in the head because he was using the little girl as a shield, and that was all I could see. In 1987, I shot 3 armed robbers that were in the process of robbing a security van, and 2 of those died, and 1 survived and stood trial. And then there was the final Azelle Rodney case, which was exactly 100 days before I was due to retire.
Tony, were you named in that case?
Well, I was. I was named in all the cases, and the reason being is that we have a thing called post-incident procedure that has developed over the years. So back in the 80s, we were very inexperienced. We'd had no real shootings. So when I was involved in my first shooting in 1985, we were really very naive. My name was released to the press at the trial. Then in 1987, the day after the incident, the press got hold of the fact that I was the same officer that had been involved in the other shooting. So my name was all over the papers. So I know exactly, you know, what Martin Blake is going to...
But when you went on trial for murder in 2005, were you named in court?
Yes, I was. And the reason for that was that I had already retired. I did have an anonymity code. I was Echo 7, just in the same way that Martin Blake was NX121. And I lost that when I was charged.
OK, so just on this point about anonymity, a lot of people find it astonishing that Martin Blake was named and now appears to be at risk of a revenge attack. Do you think there is an argument for anonymity in these cases?
I think there is an argument for anonymity, and what I think is, you know, the irony of this particular case is, of course, that Chris Kaba's accomplices and fellow gang members were allowed anonymity for their trial in relation to the shooting in the nightclub.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, and this is the irony of it. So, an honest, upright police officer does exactly what he's trained to do, loses his anonymity, and yet a team of gangsters that go into a nightclub to shoot a rival gang member are allowed anonymity. Now, what they could have done is they could have said, well, they didn't want the Chris Kaba's involvement to come out in the trial before, which I understand, but they could have given Chris Kaba a code name for that trial, and the other defendants could have stood trial in their real name, but they chose not to do that.
So many questions to ask you. One quick one before we move to Chantal, we must bring in here. There has been some discussion about why Carl was shot in the head as opposed to possibly the chest. What's your take on that?
Well, so I wasn't there to start with, but actually...
Is it a relevant question?
Well, yeah, it's a very relevant question. It did actually come out in court. The fact is that what happens. If you have to take the action immediately from the position you're standing in. And 121 in it, sorry, I say 121. Martin Blake in his evidence said that he was standing almost directly in front of the vehicle. We know from footage that we've seen that he was hunkered down in his seat. So if you think of staring at the front of an Audi car, even if you were just sitting upright in your car, you would probably only see that much. And so he went for centre mass of what he could see, which happened to be his head. The other thing, of course, is it make it sound like it's a deliberate headshot, which it isn't. We teach to shoot for centre mass, so the centre mass of what you can see. Obviously, if you're concealed behind something, then that reduces that centre mass. But also, you need to bear in mind that bullets aren't laser beams. They don't travel in a straight line, and they deflect on glass. Even a round travelling at nearly 3,000 foot per second is going to hit that glass, and it's going to deflect considerably. And it's quite unpredictable as to where it actually deflects.
Got it. OK, thank you.
Chantal, you are also a former police officer. There is a call, the former head of the Met Police, Lord Hogan Howell, has asked for firearms officers to receive the benefit of the doubt in cases such as Chris Kaba. There's never been a conviction for murder in any of the cases that have gone to court. Do you think that firearms officers should receive more protection, or would you have concerns about that? Perhaps that they shouldn't be charged at all, some people might say.
I would have concerns about that. And firstly, I do think there are instances such as the ones that have been discussed where, you know, there may be terrorism or someone who is armed and dangerous where a firearms response and, you know, proportionate lethal force is required. However, in cases such as this and such as the cases been discussed around Azelle Rodney, where somebody is unarmed, then there should be a
unarmed,
robust...
but a weapon in the car.
But unarmed at the time, because it's about what level of force they are being met with. There should be a robust scrutiny procedure. And let's put things into perspective. In the history of policing, there has never been an armed officer convicted of murder. In the history of policing, there has only been one conviction in the past 37 years of manslaughter, and that was against an officer who killed Dalian Atkinson, not with a gun, but with a taser.
Do you not trust the jury system, then?
I trust the system, as in we have a robust system with the IOPC, where the IOPC analyse a case and make a decision about whether to escalate it to prosecution. And I would say the fact that we have such low numbers that are escalated to prosecution shows that the system is working well. If we had no cases that have been escalated to prosecution, I would say questions should be asked. And I think the question is not that police should receive impunity. One of the founding principles of policing is that the police are the public and the public are the police, and that the police should be held to the same standards as the public. And if we look at cases where people have, killed a home invader, they are put through criminal proceedings, so it is reasonable in a case, not all cases, but in a case where someone is unarmed, for the public and for the police to be asking questions and saying, do you know what, in order to maintain public trust, we need to put this through a really, really transparent and robust prosecution process.
Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay.
The Home Office has just called us to say it has no official response on plans to give firearms officers more protections. It referred us to comments made by the Home Office Minister, Lord Hanson, who said in the Lords yesterday, it is for the CPS to charge and the jury to determine, and then, if a conviction occurs, the judge to pass sentence and for the criminal justice system to manage that sentence.
So they're not going to bow to pressure, are they?
They're not going to put in more protections. That it will always be dealt with, it looks like, in the courts.
I think that's reasonable, and the CPS will have weighed all of that up, and they will have made that decision. And I know that you sat next to me making a few faces and noises, but I would also argue, when we look at objectivity, someone who has been through that process and who has actually taken the life of an unarmed black man might have a little bit of an implicit bias when discussing a case such as this.
Can I just jump in here? I clearly explained that Giselle Rodney was armed. There was a gun.
He was unarmed at the time. There was a gun in the car.
No, there was a gun underneath his body.
But he was unarmed. He wasn't holding... Well, no, that's absolutely relevant, because we have to meet force. It is relevant to the case. And a High Court judge escalated it and disagreed with you. You were acquitted, but the reason it was escalated was because the High Court judge didn't accept your account initially. So it was justified in going through criminal proceedings. I understand it's a motive for you, but it was justified.
Can I just say as well that armed doesn't just mean a gun. It can mean a knife, it can mean a blunt instrument, it can mean 2.25 ton of high-power car. Yeah. All right, so he wasn't unarmed. He was using the gun. He was using it as a weapon to get away.
OK, let's discuss using the car as a weapon. We've all seen the video, and I think we could argue that he was trying to get away. Initially, he stopped. People have fight-or-flight responses, and that, to me, looked like a fight-or-flight response. And also, when we talk about the case and we make mention of gangsters and gangs, this is really emotive language. That wasn't known to the officer at the time. It wasn't known that Chris Kaba was driving the car. There was only intelligence about the car itself. So I do feel like we need to gain some perspective about the case.
Just to finish this, given, as you say, that these cases so far have all led to acquittals, are we OK as we are?
Yes.
I don't think we are. No. I don't think we are. I don't. I think there has to be. See, we actually, everyone in this room, everyone walking the streets of the UK, have exactly the same power to use force as a police officer. It's covered by Section 3 of the Criminal Law Act, and it says any person may use such force as is reasonable in the circumstances in arresting a suspect, assisting, and etc. etc. So it's any person, and any person has a right to defend themselves and use reasonable force if they have an honestly held belief that they're in danger. Now, that's absolutely fine. And when I was a police officer, even in 2005, before I eventually stood trial, I thought that was absolutely reasonable. And I still do to a certain extent. However, to me, the difference is that we have, that power for everybody to use force was used when we had hue and cry. When the police force was first created in the 1800s, and when we had a sense of community and people would jump in and help police officers because they saw that as their duty. As Chantel said, the police are the public are the police. Not anymore. The public will get out their mobile phone and the next thing you know, it'll be on television. But no, let me just finish. The other issue to me is we don't train the public to fire lethal weapons in circumstances where they have to protect themselves or other people. So that is the difference to me. It seems very perverse to me that we can train police officers to take life if necessary, not that that's their intention, but to use potentially lethal force. And then the moment they do that, the only course of action is a criminal charge.
Okay.
To me, there has to be something like medical profession, the way they're looked at.
Can I just come in? We've talked about public perceptions of police and, you know, armed officers like David Carrick and Wayne Cousins have both been convicted of murder and rape. So public perceptions and public trust in policing is at an all-time low. It's reasonable to expect a member of the public who takes a life to appear in court, and therefore it is also reasonable to expect an officer, not all armed officers, but officers who shoot and kill unarmed black people, to face criminal procedures and to stand up in court.
How about white people?
Anybody who's unarmed, anybody.
You said
anybody. But it's significant. Race is significant to this conversation, so let's not put that. No, it's absolutely significant.
Okay, I'm afraid I'm not, sorry, I'm not censoring what you're
like
saying.
No, it's fine, it's fine.
Yeah, we're short of time now.
But thank you both for making really important, significant points. It's still a highly charged, highly sensitive issue, but it's very interesting to hear.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you both for coming in. We appreciate it.
Yeah, and very interesting response from the Home Officers as well.
Yeah,
It seems
no
like
change here.
There's nothing going to change.
It's good news.